The views and opinions expressed by the hosts do not state or reflect those of the company and its management. Furthermore, the assumptions, views, opinions, and insinuations made by the hosts or the guests do not reflect those of the show, the management, and the company.
Identify, discussed, understand. Casting live from Manila, Philippines, we are Simply Security, helping you streamline security easily.
Hello, good evening, Philippines.
Good evening, listeners.
Welcome back to another season of Simply Security, our second episode for the season 2, recorded live today, 10th of February 2021. This is Miles Melia.
My name is Eric Alindogan.
Welcome to Simply Security.
Streamlining security easily.
Hello, Eric.
Hi, Miles. How are you?
It's been 2 weeks since we last saw each other.
Exactly. I just wanted to say that we have a very successful season opener 2 weeks ago, wherein we talk about situational awareness, of course, with Mr. Thomas Pecora and Miss Yvonne Armstrong. For tonight's episode, we wanted to jump off from that particular episode and talk about something that is related, which is behavioral analysis.
I know. So if you miss the past episode, you may catch our recording on Spotify. Don't miss that because, like what you said, this is totally related from our first episode for season 2. So tonight we are excited to have a very distinguished professional who will be talking about the topic for tonight. He is a renowned security professional with international civil aviation background. He joined Transworld Airlines security subsidiary at London Heathrow in the 1980s, where from duty manager, he moved to TWA's international headquarters, where he became the manager for security training and auditing. In 1996, he established Greenlight and serves as subject matter expert for the Airports Council International, or ACI, in the area of behavioral analysis and run a number of trainings accordingly.
He also designed and delivered the International Air Transport Association in-flight security courses and has worked with IATA on integrating behavioral analysis into airport security checkpoints. Eventually, he was appointed as visiting professor in aviation security by Coventry University in 2018. He was also the editor of the Aviation Security International since 1997 and authored his first book entitled Violence in the Skies: History of Aircraft Hijacking and Bombing. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor to welcome him in the podcast, Mr. Philip Baum.
Good evening from Philippines. Good evening, Eric. Good evening, Miles. It's a real pleasure to be here from a freezing cold London morning.
Thank you for accommodating our invitation for tonight's episode, Philip. I could see that it will be a very engaging and exciting discussion. Especially, we'll be talking about something very relevant.
Very close to your heart.
Yeah, not only in the security industry, but also for non-security professionals. So perhaps to level and set the expectations with regard to our discussion, Philip, we wanted to know, how will we operationally define behavioral analysis in the context of our discussion for tonight?
I suppose the best way of framing it is that behavioral analysis in terms of security is about the application of common sense. It's about appreciating what is normal for the environment that we're providing security in and recognizing when something is not normal and acting accordingly. So much of what we do in a security setting is driven by what technology can do, and I don't want to undermine the value of technology. It's really important, but technologies are tools and they need to be used intelligently, and the behavioral analysis element helps us decide how best to use technology and how best to resolve.
It complements it.
And it's also, so much of security is reactive to things that have happened in the past. And behavioral analysis can help us identify the threats of the future as well, things that technologies maybe not currently looking for. It's about doing what we all do in our everyday lives and recognizing when things just don't seem right.
For a non-security professional like me, Mr. Philip Baum, I would like to know, is this a new paradigm, or it has been there, but little do the security professionals know that they're already doing or applying it?
Well, I think that's the point. It's actually been there since the beginning of time. Even when we're going about our social lives, we use utilize behavioral analysis techniques. When we go into a room and we meet strangers, we get a general feel about how we react to other people that might be in the room. If somebody knocks on your front door, we have a natural reaction. It's always been there. The problem is, from a security setting, because it is subjective, and one can't get away from the fact that it is a subjective process. The regulators, security regulators, have shied away from behavioral analysis because it is exceptionally difficult to actually regulate. They much prefer it when an archway metal detector goes buzz and we can say, oh, let's try and resolve the cause of the alarm and find the metal item in somebody's pocket, rather than somebody saying, you know what, I've got a bad feeling. So the reality is it's always been there. Every security agency in the world seems to embrace it. The police use behavioral analysis, the military use behavioral analysis, immigration authorities use it, customs authorities, everybody uses it. There is a natural reluctance from regulators to truly embrace it because A, it's difficult to test it, B, they're really terrified that people will resort to racial profiling.
Yeah, we will talk about that later. Now, Philip, in our previous episode, we talked about situational awareness with Thomas, Cora, and Miss Yvonne. Now, we heavily discussed on intuition. Now, basing on our conversation, it seemed like we are heading towards the discussion suspicious behaviors. And as someone who is not a security professional, and I am maybe speaking to our non-security professionals, are intuition and suspicion different, or are they the same?
They're interconnected. Intuition, that sixth sense, is certainly something we need to embrace. I mean, let's face it, we even tell the general public, if you see something strange, to say something. If you see something suspicious, to act on it. And that is normally based on intuition. I mean, I think what's different is that intuition varies from person to person. Suspicion very much is dictated by one's appreciation of one's operating environment. So I come from an airport background, and I'm very tuned in with what is normal and what is suspicious in an airport operating environment. Same thing with sports stadia, with shopping malls, with museums. And in every environment, you get what is to be the baseline, what your expectations are. And if somebody, for example, is going to a major sports event in the Philippines, of course, and they're wearing a heavy overcoat, well, that would be suspicious.
Odd.
Odd, but it would be really odd if they were attending a Premier League football match this weekend and not wearing a heavy overcoat. So it has to be, what is suspicious depends on the operating environment in which one's working. But intuition is slightly more subjective, and it is possibly a slightly more mature approach to it because you're building on all of your different life experiences. The problem with suspicious signs lists is that they become like checklists. Checklists actually fly in the face of effective behavioral analysis. A lot of people say, can you like give us a list of indicators that we should be looking for? And I say, no, I can't. I mean, I can say, well, maybe somebody that is sweating profusely and shifting their weight from foot to foot. I mean, that's a very naive approach to it. You need to look at the big picture. You need to look at all of the different inputs, the environment, the dress, the behavior, the number of people that are there. And it's almost impossible to actually come up with just a checklist of suspicious signs. And it is an overview of the situation that you're looking at.
And it's also dynamic.
It's very dynamic. And then at the same time, I think it's really more of like a collection of your experiences and your knowledge with regard to a particular context that drives your intuition vis-a-vis your suspicious indicators. I've done a heavy training in terms of anticipative profiling. One of the components that we've talked about there is baseline behavior. What do you mean by baseline behavior for the benefit of our audience?
Baseline behavior is what you would normally expect of a person in a given environment. For example, if it's a football match, what do you normally expect of spectators that are coming to watch a football match? If you're at a casino, what's your normal expectation of people that are visiting a casino? If it's on the beach, what's your normal expectation of people going as sunbathers to the beach? But it's also recognizing that there isn't one reason for going to a beach. There isn't one reason for going to a casino. You've got all the people that work there, all the people that provide services there, all the people that live near there, and actually having a recognition of what is normal for all the different people who might have access to a given area at a given point in time, and recognizing when something doesn't quite fit.
It's been 4 months since I joined the Simply Security podcast, and there are a lot of terminologies and yeah, that security professionals are using that I've known being part of this, like what Eric mentioned a while ago, anticipative profiling, deduction. There's also process of elimination and elicitation. But Philip, can we really tell if somebody is lying just by their body language?
No, I don't believe that you can. I think that there are a lot of people out there that claim to be lie detectors, human lie
Or
detectors.
Sherlock
and
Holmes.
yeah, I mean that sounds great for the stage show,
Mhm.
but actually, most of the academic research will tell you that there is absolutely no such thing as a human lie detector. That, however, I'm not saying that we might not identify somebody who might be lying, but we're not identifying that they are lying. What we might be able to identify by their behavior is that they are experiencing stress.
Yeah.
And we don't know what the cause of that stress is. So again, go to an airport. There are a lot of people, or there used to be,
Or weary.
Mhm.
pre-pandemic. There are a lot of reasons why people might be stressed at an airport. I mean, people have got a fear of flying. Go to an airport, you are never met by more people in security uniforms than at an airport. You've got customs, immigration, check-in staff, flight attendants. Everybody wants to inspect you, and that causes stress for a lot of people. Just the number of checks cause stress. So we might notice somebody behaving strangely or answering questions in a way that doesn't meet our baseline expectations, but
Right.
it does not mean they are lying. It might be an indicator of lying, but it could equally be an indicator of some other underlying cause of stress.
Coming from the previous episode, we keep on jumping from the previous episode because we
This is too
wanted to
related.
highlight. We feel that these two are related. One thing that was highlighted, there's such a thing as universal behavior or emotions across all cultures. So my question is there such thing as universal body languages that may lead to suspicious behaviors?
I think the simple answer is no. I think one maybe needs to sort of understand that people's behavior is different, and different cultures behave differently in different situations. We all know
Right.
that. The way that shoppers behave in the United States is different to the way that shoppers behave in Russia, and the way that sun worshippers behave in the Mediterranean is different to the way that sun worshippers behave in Australia. There are differences, and what we are doing is actually saying that, I've taught profiling, and I don't have a problem with the word profiling. I know some people think, oh, it's
Yeah.
racist. No, it's not racial profiling. I believe in profiling. I believe in differentiation, and I can teach it, and I've taught it for most of my professional life. But I would not be the best profiler in Manila. You would be a much better profiler than I
Right.
would be in Manila, because it's your home environment. It's the environment that you understand. You understand the nuances of behavior that may be exhibited in the context of being in the Philippines. So I think what we can do is tune people into what they ought to be looking at. But what might be baseline expectations for me is going to be different to what are baseline expectations for you.
So culture is really a big factor here.
It's a huge factor, and we also need to recognize, I suppose, a country's recent history is going to play an impact on it. I mean, maybe the best example there I can give you is the Israeli context.
Right.
The behavioral analysis or profiling has been part and parcel of the Israeli security effort ever since the State of Israel came into being. And people have had no problem with it there until recently, because it's been shown to be effective, and because security is considered so much a priority, and to a certain extent even more important than a lot of other civil rights that people have. People feel that the greatest right they have is to the protection from their security services. Whereas in the UK, you find that what we do in terms of security is, everybody wants security, but people don't want us to do things that impinge upon civil liberties, that result in people challenging. There are a lot of people think, for example, at airports, that it's only fair if you treat everybody the same. And I'm thinking, that sounds so wonderful if you treat everybody the same. It's terrible security because it means that you're not applying logic to it, but there is that expectation, whereas in other cultures that might not be the case.
Now, I have a question for you, Philip. If you use subjective approach to security, you've been mentioning this racial profiling. Could that result to racial profiling? And how do we strike the balance between effective suspicious behavior detection from stereotyping? But before you answer those questions, let me cut this briefly for some short break, and we will be right back. Silverpoint would like to invite you in hands-on open source intelligence workshop. This 2-day workshop will be on the 3rd to 4th of March 2021, 9 o'clock a.m. Manila time. Learn techniques from Mr. Ethan Levin, an intelligence expert with more than 20 years of experience. Know your employees, customers, and providers better. Transform open source data into valuable insights. Perfect for HR, marketing, PR, management teams, legal professionals, media practitioners, security, and intelligence officers. For inquiries, kindly email Silverpoint at businessprofiles.com.ph and look for Danielle. And we're back. Welcome back to Simple Security. We're talking about behavioral analysis with Mr. Philip Baum from the freezing nation of United Kingdom. Before we post for a short break, earlier, we asked him about racial profiling. If you use a subjective approach to security, could that result to racial profiling? And how to strike a balance between effective suspicious behavior detection and from stereotyping. So, Mr. Philip?
Of course, that, Miles, is the biggest concern that everybody's got.
Yes.
If you just apply profiling, doesn't that mean that you're going to pick on a certain demographic within society all the time? There is a risk of that. I'm not going to pretend there isn't a risk of it. Stereotypes exist. Indeed, I've spoken about baseline behavior, and a lot about baseline behavior is about baseline stereotypical expectations of how people behave. We have to recognize that it exists. And in fact, a lot of humor is based on stereotyping. We don't only stereotype, for example, the stereotypical terrorist. We have a stereotype of the meanest people in the world, the funniest people in the world, the happiest people in the world, the warmest, the coldest, the this, the that. Yeah, I mean, so we've got all of these expectations, and that's what builds up the rich tapestry of life and societies that we live in. So how do we guard against? And I think that more to the point. And for me, when we are teaching security, it is all too easy to use the big cases that people use all of the time that tend to illustrate the actions of one particular brand of terrorism that is out. So we can go to the extravaganzas of September the 11th, 2001, or London 7/7 bombings, or the Ariana Grande Manchester Arena attack.
Right.
You can go to all of those big attacks and just focus on those case studies. Or you can actually say in the training that, yes, I'm not trying to pretend those didn't happen, but actually illustrate the whole host of other types of threats that are out there. And for me, for example, at the moment, I think that probably a mental ill health poses as much of a threat to society and the actions of lone individuals who may be suicidal. And they exist in every country around the world. Nobody can say, well, we don't face that kind of threat. Behavioral analysis is not designed just to identify the big terrorist extravaganzas. It's designed to identify criminal behavior, petty theft, sexually deviant behavior, things related to mental ill health, but for example, a potential attempt at suicide, human trafficking, victims of human trafficking and the traffickers themselves. If we can start to tune into when things don't appear to be normal, we can identify a host of different security challenges. For those of your viewers that are coming from the corporate sector are concerned about insider threats. Most insider threats are actually, the motivation is normally financial rather than to perform some terrorist spectacular. So it's really important in the training that one doesn't just get hooked on the Islamist radicalized terrorism that the media have actually helped to stereotype as being the be all and end. I'm not trying to pretend that isn't out there. Of course that's out there, but it's not the only threat we face. And in terms of racial profiling, no community has probably been affected more negatively by that stereotyping than the Muslim community. They have been targeted more, they've become victims, and we need to make sure that actually in the training we do provide some cultural awareness training, and that people recognize. It's important that we recognize our natural biases. At the same time, I do have to add a caveat to that. And the caveat is that a lot of the times we're accused of racial profiling, and it's not that we're being racist, it's that we're seeing things that we're not used to. So, for example, if I'm in London, I'm at a tourist attraction, and I see a Buddhist monk arrive. For most people that are doing security at a tourist attraction in London, they're not used to seeing Buddhist monks. Look at them in a slightly different way, and they won't really know quite how to interact. They're not being racist. They're simply saying, it's not part of my life experience. I don't quite know how to react, and it's new to me. And it would be wrong to say that they're wrong to identify that. That maybe that person would need a little bit more scrutiny, simply because we have to recognize the limitations of each security person's life experience.
I think it's very important to reiterate what Philip have mentioned.
It applies to us too, right?
Exactly. And I totally agree with the fact that as a security professional, of course, threats of terrorism is there, especially if you're working on a critical area such as airport or an area of convergence such as a mall or a business district. However, sometimes past cases have also implied that threats of lone wolf attacks, like let's say here in the Philippines, in the context of the Philippines, we have what happened in the Resorts World Manila attack. It's a lone wolf. However, I think we've also discussed this on our previous episodes, but the impact of it is almost just the same. Probably my question now, out of the box, because I understand that there's a process. You detect the suspicious indicators. How do you respond to that suspicious indicator? Or how do you validate that that particular behavior is indeed suspicious?
Well, I suppose to a certain extent that depends on what your management allow you to do and what they train you to do. It's very easy to say, go and question the person, go and have a conversation. And I personally believe that normally if you do see something strange, it is important to go and have a conversation with the individual, unless you think that they might be the potential suicide bomber who is literally going to carry out their attack at this moment in time. That a conversation is vitally important, but you have to provide people with the training to do that. You can't just say, well, watch a video for 10, 15 minutes, and this tells you what to do, and then go and have a conversation and expect people to go and do that. I would encourage any of your viewers to look at the inquiry. It's available online into the Manchester attack. That's the Ariana Grande concert attack in Manchester. Inquiry's been going on over the last couple of months, and it's really quite disturbing when you hear the testimony of the security guards about how they were getting conflicting information, that they were watching a video that said, go and have a conversation with somebody, because they used a generic training video. And at the same time, they were also told, if you see something strange in their training course, they need to go and report it. And so I think every organization, and this is where it's down to management, and it's down to management, what do they expect of their staff to do? You have to tell your staff what you expect of them, but you also have to empower your staff to act outside the box and to sometimes take action that might not be in accordance with the operating protocol. And a lot of security managers say, no, we don't want our frontline people acting unilaterally without reporting things. But sometimes there are times where you have to do that, where if you see something suspicious, if you don't act now, and if you just start going through the reporting chain, it may be too late. Give you an example of, there was a suicide bombing in Tel Aviv, in Israel, at Mike's Place, which is a bar on the seafront. The security guard that was outside the front of Mike's Place saw an individual walking towards him. There wasn't time to go and have a conversation. There wasn't time to call somebody on a radio. All that security guard could do was say, I need to take action myself. And they did, and that person saved many, 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 many lives as a result. We need to recognize that when we're deploying people at checkpoints, we should be empowering them in extreme circumstances to make unilateral decisions. They're not just there to make it look nice. I mean, yes, deterrent value is important, but they're there to provide security. And we need to tell people what we expect of them. we need to tell them what the risks are, and we need to tell them when they can act outside the box. And acting outside the box could be something as simple as, excuse me, I don't know the telephone number in the Philippines, but if I want to call the police here in the UK, I dial 999.
Right.
Well, nearly everybody's got a mobile phone. Nearly everybody could do that. Now, a lot of security managers would say, I'm not having my security guard call 999. But sometimes maybe there is a need to do that when you need an immediate, for example, a response that you know you're not going to get from management.
Yeah, you're trying to say, Philip, that time is of the essence. Decision making is important for the front lines. And you have to give them not just the templated kind of training, but you have to let them know that you trust their decisions as well.
Absolutely. And if not, then you're just paying lip service to security and you're just ticking the boxes and you're saying we're doing it. I'll give you an example from the Philippines and from many other countries around the world.
Sure.
But I know in a lot of places I've been to in Asia in particular, that I might arrive in a vehicle to a hotel or a shopping mall where the routine process is to ask the driver to open the trunk, the boot of the car, and somebody comes and puts their head in. I'm not quite sure what they think they're looking for.
Exactly.
But they're opening the trunk. And the only thing they ever look at is the trunk. Or maybe they walk around with a mirror because of course, all bombs are only ever concealed just underneath the sides of the vehicle. And I'm thinking, this is mindless tick box security. At the very least, every vehicle should be checked in a different way. You know, people could conceal something in the seats of a vehicle, in the engine, underneath underneath the passenger seats. There are so many places things could be concealed. And unless you're going to train people to actually adapt the processes and make it variable, you end up with a very predictable security system that is almost worthless, other than saying we had security. When you do see something, you need to know what to do next.
Right.
You know, at what point, if you did see something that you would think poses an imminent danger to the facility you're trying to protect, what are you going to do? Are you just going to call on your radio, your supervisor? Who's going to call the duty manager? Who's going to call somebody in a control room? Who's going to call somebody, by which time it's all too late? Or are you at times going to actually do real security? And a lot of that assessment process, we never provide people with the training to do. And the reason we don't provide people with the training is that often it's because we have employed minimum wage employees, not invested in their training, that we're just simply putting men or women there in some
warm bodies
for the sake. Let me do a follow-up on that scenario that you mentioned. Is that an experience that is isolated in the Philippines, or have you experienced that to other countries as well?
I've experienced it around the world, but you know, I've gone into shopping malls in Thailand where some security guard is there with his little
magic stick.
What
and then
doing?
it disappears. Yeah.
I mean, is it like some sort of cookery class or something? I mean, do you really think that somebody's going to leave some weapon or improvised explosive device like just sort of sitting on the top of the bag? Have you never heard of false linings? You know, if somebody wants to get through a security system. And I wouldn't mind if the security guard had been trained in behavioral analysis. And what they were doing was doing the bowl mixing with the stick whilst doing a risk analysis of the person. Then I completely buy it. If you're buying time to be able to have a conversation at the same time, all well and good.
If it's a technique that you're doing, right?
I just wanted to pull the conversation back again in terms of the validation, because I remember a very memorable case study. I'm not sure whether or not you've heard of Anne-Marie Murphy case.
Very well.
So for the benefit of Miles and our non-security professional, it's actually a very interesting case study when we talk about validating, suspicious indicator. Because on that particular case study, it's a case of an Irish pregnant woman who was actually arriving in an Israeli airport, and then apparently she was invited to be asked questions. We call it probing questions, just for them to be able to isolate whether or not the identity that she's he's trying to portray actually holds true. It involves, like, let's say, where she was staying, what's her profession. And then it's interesting because the manner of questioning was not even linear. The person in questioning keeps repeating the same question again just for him to be able to establish whether or not the identity was correct. And then eventually they found out that there's actually a plot on that particular issue.
Can I just clarify
Go
one
ahead.
thing on that? It's a story I'm very familiar with. Anne-Marie Murphy was actually traveling on El Al from London Heathrow
Yes.
to Tel Aviv. She was actually identified by the security guards in London before boarding the flight, but
I
after
see.
her bag had been x-rayed. And yes, Eric, you're absolutely right. The type of questioning was, actually, it was a very basic questioning. They
Yes.
really weren't particularly pushed. What the first concern they had, though, was actually about baseline expectations. And by the way, I want to clarify one other thing here. As you correctly say, we're talking about a young, white, pregnant, Catholic Irish woman, not somebody who is the stereotypical threat to an Israeli.
Right.
You know, she didn't look the stereotypical image of a terrorist. She was being used by a terrorist. She was duped into carrying a device. Actually, as she was approaching the security guard, they were thinking, that's unusual. I don't get many pregnant women traveling on their own.
Alone.
Right,
Yeah.
the first thought was actually, I've got a pregnant woman walking towards me to get on a flight, and she's carrying a foreign passport, an Irish passport in this case. Even that automatically was a little bit unusual. It wasn't that she was showing signs of nervousness. She wasn't sweating profusely. She was anxious about flying. She was anxious, but she'd been told not to declare who her boyfriend was. She was, and she'd been told just to say you're going on holiday, because if you just say you're going on holiday, and they believe that a pregnant Catholic woman wouldn't look suspicious. But actually, just by being the pregnant Catholic woman, she was out. She didn't meet baseline behavior, because as soon as they said, where are you going? She said, on holiday. They thought, whoa, a 6.5-month pregnant woman is going on holiday to the Holy Land? Who are you going with? On my own? On your own? I mean, it was really actually quite basic. Where are you staying? The Hilton Hotel. The Hilton Hotel? Who stays in a Hilton Hotel for 2 weeks on their own whilst pregnant? Pregnant women normally go back to their family, or they're traveling with their partner. I'm not saying that you have to do that. Actually, it was the image created by Anne-Marie Murphy that was the cause for concern. I'll give you another example. It's not only about people, it's about items. I mean, Eric, you've given an excellent example there, albeit it's from 1986. It can be about items as well. I mean, I'll give you another example. More recently, it's only 11 years ago now, of the printer toner cartridge bombs that were sent from Yemen to the United States. We had 2 printers that were sent, and fortunately, Saudi Arabian intelligence actually was able to indicate that not only were 2 bombs being sent by air cargo, by courier shipments, but they were actually able to provide the Germans, the Americans, and the Emiratis the intel that included the airway bill numbers of the consignment. So we actually knew not only that there were 2 bombs, but we knew which packages they were in. It's about as good as it gets from an intel point of view. When the first package was intercepted in East Midlands Airport in the UK, they did what they normally would do. Okay, we've got a suspect package. They used dogs, canine unit. They used X-ray. They used ETD, explosive trace detection technology. They physically searched it. They found nothing. And in Dubai, they did the same thing, but apparently with no dogs. That they used X-ray, they used explosive trace detection, they used physical search, they found nothing. But then an Emirati security officer said, I'm sorry, we've got intel. Yes, when we've looked at it, it hasn't alarmed for anything. But not only have we got intel, we have to look at what our baseline expectations are here. We've got a computer printer, not a very sophisticated one, being sent by courier from Yemen, not the world's prime supplier of printers, to the United States. It would be cheaper to buy a new computer printer in the United States than to
ship it.
have somebody take one by, I can't remember if that one was UPS or FedEx, but it was sent by one of those methods. That doesn't make sense. He then went a stage further and he looked at the address that it was being sent to. And when he Googled, or I don't know which search engine he used, but he used the search engine, he found that the address in Chicago belonged to the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Jewish community of Chicago. And even for an Emirati security officer, he thought, not very familiar with Jewish communities, but he thought, wait a minute, from Yemen to a Jewish community? and I've got intel telling me there's a bomb. I don't care the fact that the technology is not alarming. Something is wrong. And he instructed that the printer be taken apart. And inside, they found the explosive device, which had been concealed in a highly professional manner, without leakage, without traces. He basically said, my human brain is better than the technologies that all have their limitations. Notified the British, they found exactly the same concealment. And that for me is behavioral analysis, because it took a human being to be able to look at the overall situation and say, this does not add up. And I don't care about the fact that the X-ray machine didn't find anything. I don't care that it didn't test positive under EPD. And I don't care the fact that the dogs didn't find it. I'm sorry, specific intel and consignment doesn't make sense. That is superb behavioral analysis. And I think that Emirati security officer is probably one of the greatest heroes of the security industry of the 21st century.
My other question there, going back to the case of Anne Murphy, the character relatively fits well in the crowd. But on an operational perspective or point of view, let's say I'm in security, wouldn't this slow down security processes, create longer queues or lines? I'm asking in behalf of all, the security professionals.
Yeah, it's interesting that people often say, but all of this is going to slow down the process. And I'm thinking, actually, no, it should do the exact opposite. It should speed up the process. There is a lot that we do at security checkpoints that is completely meaningless and pointless that slows down the process. For example, confiscating liquids, aerosols, and gels from passengers at airports. To me, just routinely confiscating that, it just takes up time and serves no security value whatsoever. Actually, behavioral analysis should not be performed at a security checkpoint. Behavioral analysis is something, or behavior detection is something that should start from the moment that we first see an individual arriving at the facility. So it may be, I've done a security consultancy at major sporting events. You don't want to do the checks at the checkpoint. It's too late. I mean, if you identify somebody there and they really do have hostile intent and they may be a suicide bomber, you're just going to maximize the casualties, number of casualties. You want to start the process at the train station or at the bus stop or at where people are dropped off. And you want to be able to intercept people whilst they're walking towards the facility.
There's a response time.
At the checkpoint. Yeah, I mean, the checkpoint is the checkpoint, and that's where you may have your tick box security about what you're allowed to do. And yes, you'll look at people all the time. But the behavioral analysis for me is about seeing the people as they start to arrive, thinking, does this person meet my normal baseline expectations of behavior? If they do, fine, let them go. I don't need to go and do anything more than that. If they don't, think about whether or not you're going to have a conversation with them, go and have a friendly chat and find out why they are in that. I mean, you can't come up with a script.
You have to be spontaneously creative to create like a technique or strategy on how to
to deal with them.
Eric, you mentioned Anne-Marie Murphy. You know, when you fly on aeroplanes and you're asked those questions, did you pack your bag yourself? Has anybody given you anything? That's all because of Anne-Marie Murphy. Those were questions that were introduced, but they were never introduced as closed questions. They were never introduced as
open-ended.
Did you pack your bag yourself? They were introduced as who packed your bag? Because the idea was that we should look at the person whilst we're asking them. And actually, the answer was important, but what was more important was the person's demeanor when you asked the question. What have airlines around the world done in the last 10, 20 years? We've gone for an automated system where now when you check in for a flight, 24 hours before you check in for the flight, you go online and then you're asked those questions. Have you packed your bag yourself? And you're thinking, well, I haven't packed my bag yet. I'm going to pack my bag tomorrow morning, but I guess I better say yes. I mean, it's become so tick box, so covering your backside that it's sort of pointless. Security should be intelligent. You know, the threats that we face in society today, the terrorists that we face, they're not ignorant, they're not fools. They understand our operating processes, and we need to be better than that. And that means training people and empowering people and getting people to think outside the box. When I do consultancy work, the first thing I'll often do when I go to a client is I'll actually get people to think about how they would attack their own facility and say, okay, so listen, how would you go about doing it? And let's see whether we can build a system that is resilient to the threats of the future that even you and your team have just thought of.
True.
It's about common sense. It's about actually having faith that what you're doing is important. and that you can make a difference. Anything else, you're just ticking the boxes.
I like what you said, but security has to be intelligent because for a non-security like me, when you say a criminal mind, someone who have thought of something thoroughly to execute it perfectly. So to intercept that or to counter that, you have to be 5 steps
Ahead of them.
You do need to be ahead of them, but you also need, when do I want to stop a terrorist attack? I don't want to stop it on the day of the attack.
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
course.
On the day of the attack, the terrorist actually thinks that they're going to get away with it because they understand the limitations of my security system. I want to stop the terrorist attack when they're doing their hostile reconnaissance, when they're surveying the target, when they are thinking about carrying out the attack. I want them to, when they come and think about attacking my facility, to come along and say, security here is pretty good. They're thinking outside the box. The risk to me is too high to carry out an attack.
Yeah, yeah.
There goes your deterrence.
I can't operate at the political level where I can say, let's find a way of getting rid of terrorism in the world, because that's beyond us. Certainly beyond my remit. But I can try and help organizations come up with a security system that will, I guess, sadly say, you're not going to attack us and you have to go elsewhere. I don't want them to attack anywhere, but you need to build the resilience in your own facility.
I just have an observation specifically about Filipinos or most Asians. So this is a cultural observation. It is being observed that most Filipinos are generally passive. Now, you promote here is assertiveness in terms of the proactive response. But how can you do that if you have this kind of cultural observation for Filipinos against suspicious behavior?
Again, that boils down to the amount of training, the number of role plays that you do, the amount of supervision that you give, and the penalties for failure. I mean, if you have a security regime where you tolerate poor performance and where you don't take action against employees who are not doing what you are expecting them to do, it becomes cosmetic. I mean, X-ray operators are often tested all the time. You know, have you identified the threat that might be concealed in the bag? And if somebody fails twice, then maybe they'll be taken off the X-ray machine and no longer allowed to perform X-ray duties. I think the same applies to actually when you're doing behavioral analysis, that we need to test the system all the time to demonstrate how somebody might get through, and have a very low threshold, basically a zero tolerance for failure. And actually, people's jobs depend on it, that, you know, you are going to perform. One of the problems, and this isn't only about the Philippines, this is about security worldwide. When I started in behavioral analysis, and when I first went on training courses, about 50% of the people would pass the course and about 50% of the people would fail the course. That depended on your performance in role plays, in written tests, and there was an expectation that you should perform. Nowadays, on security courses, there's almost an expectation that everybody should pass, that it's very difficult to fail people, even on a security course. And somehow it's the fault of the instructor. You didn't find the right technique to teach them, and you weren't understanding enough. I'm sorry, we're talking security here. The military wouldn't set just sort of a let's pass everybody approach to it. We need to have much greater expectations of the people that we employ.
So we're talking about
we need
lives.
to make them more accountable, and they need to know that their jobs depend upon them performing. I mean, it's interesting you said that Filipinos are
generally passive.
And it's interesting because there you go. I mean, I'm not saying that I've encountered people in the Philippines who are not passive, but my stereotypical image of the Filipino is the Filipino knife fighter. It's interesting just how it depends on where you live, because I know the best knife fighters in the world are from the Philippines. That's not a negative thing. It's just one of the things that's going on.
Just to wrap up this particular segment, my last question coming from us is, let's say in certain situations wherein I think that there's something wrong, but it's at the same time, it's not dangerous. How do you resolve that?
Well, I suppose to a certain extent, you've got to decide what you think it is. For example, I've done security consultancy at major sporting events, and there is criminal behavior that we have seen. For example, sexually deviant behavior. We were identifying people who were doing upskirt photography. You know, is that dangerous? No. Is it antisocial? Yes. Is it criminal? Yes. Should action be taken against people who carry out acts of upskirt photography? Absolutely. But you have to decide what is your remit and what are you there to do? And so that's one factor that you need to sort of think about. But what you have to be very careful about is that if you have got concerns, you don't try and justify your concerns as saying, oh, you know what, it's probably okay. Or if I do report it, I'm probably going to be accused of being racist. If you see something, you have to act. You can't just say, well, it's probably okay. And that's where the whole system falls down. An archway metal detector, if it goes buzz, you act. The same should apply with the human brain, that if the brain goes buzz, something's not right here, you have to act, and you mustn't talk yourself out of it. Again, go to the Manchester Arena, and I feel sorry for the security guards there because they failed to act, even though a member of the general public even went and reported their concerns about the suicide bomber, even though they looked at the suicide bomber and were concerned about them. But the reason they didn't take action was, one, for fear of breaking procedure by leaving their post to go and contact somebody, and they thought, if I leave this door, I'll get in trouble, even though they were dealing with a possible suicide bomber who they admit they did think could have been a suicide bomber. And secondly, because they felt that they might be accused, or one of them in particular said, I haven't got any proof, and if I'm wrong, I'll be accused of being a racist. And that fear prevented action. So I would say, if you see something, you have to say something, or you have to do something. And you mustn't ever just somehow give in to the commercial demands of the organization. I mean, unfortunately, it is true everywhere in the world, airports, you measure airport security checkpoints by throughput rate, time spent waiting in a queue, time spent not spending money in duty-free shops, rather than actually in security outcome.
Well, thank you so much, Philip. I'm in awe. Not just about the stories, but I'm picking a lot of things here. But thank you very much for your insights. Now, let us just take another quick break. And when we return, we will be continuing the discussion by reading some of our participants' insights and questions. Yes, exactly. We have a lot only here on Simply Security.
Streamlining security easily.
Tonight's episode is brought to you by Business Profiles Incorporated, leading the way to strategic corporate risk and security management solutions. Business Profiles Incorporated, our business is to keep you in business. Black Pearl Consultancy, bringing intelligence analysis, travel security, and business continuity support to new heights. Black Pearl Consultancy, intelligence for smarter decisions.
BP Argus Security Services Incorporated. For holistic industrial protection, BP Argus Security Services is committed to the highest standards of providing effective security manpower services. Blue Force Security Services, the security manpower of choice by many companies and organizations in the Philippines. Blue Force Security Services, delivering quality protection and service integrity to your corporate needs.
Chronicle Data and Research Solutions. Chronicle Data and Research Solutions provides comprehensive corporate inquiries and background checks for businesses and organizations. Chronicle Data and Research Solutions, delivering concise, factual, and relevant service through expertise and trust.
Silver Point Training and Development, the knowledge and skill building arm of Business Profiles Inc., offering the latest, most practical and strategic briefings and corporate trainings in the field of business security.
We're back and we have Mr. Philip Baum on the podcast. We will be answering some of our participants' questions and comments.
All right, let me start. We happen to have a question from Ronnie Tidhar. I hope I pronounced his last name correctly.
Hello.
But he's asking, how do you apply behavioral detection when people are with face masks and irritated due to catching COVID-19 virus while they are at the airport, aircraft, stadium, and such? I think this is something very current.
Certainly very topical and a huge concern. It's going to be it's one of my main concerns as the world goes through its post-pandemic recovery. And I look at some of the procedures that are being put in place. And the fact is that even at airport security checkpoints and indeed checkpoints elsewhere, we are encouraging social distancing, people to stand further away, not to carry out physical pat-down searches. We don't want people to get that close. And yet, at the same time, as Ronnie points out, a lot of these people are wearing masks. You can't see faces, you can't see their expressions. And of course, people are actually have another reason to be anxious because they're going to be very anxious about their surroundings and being too close to people. I'm not going to pretend that it isn't an impediment to behavioral analysis. It is, but we're going to have to adapt to it. What I would say is that behavioral analysis is not just about the facial expression. It's about the body movement. It's about the respiration rate. It's about the items that people carry. I mean, Ronnie's cited an airport example. I'll give you another airport example of the Brussels airport bombings. The concern was expressed about the three bombers who arrived at Brussels Zaventem Airport was that they came by taxi. They would not allow anybody else to touch the bags as they took the bags out of the car. Nobody commented on their facial expression. It was about they wouldn't allow people to touch their bags. They took three very large, very heavy suitcases, put them on three different baggage trolleys. Again, often when people are traveling together, they put two bags on one trolley. But the fact is they took three separate trolleys and not one of them had an item of hand baggage. Again, very unusual for people to have big, heavy suitcases and not a single item of carry-on baggage to take onto a flight. Might have the carry-on baggage, but not the suitcases, but not dressed for long haul without carry-on baggage. And then two of them we know only had one glove on one hand, and they had the other hand didn't have a glove on. There were other factors. It's not all about the facial expression. It is about the whole picture that is created.
I just want to reiterate as well, because I think in a previous episode, when we talk about mall security, this is also one of the major challenges, probably not only in the Philippines, but on the region. Because now, when people come in, there's that mask that as we've discussed, it becomes a challenge. So probably I just wanted to say that this particular context does not only apply on the aviation or the airport setting, but all throughout, where security is needed. Could be in your corporate office or in a mall or what have you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
We did some work with a sports stadium that was actually looking at the way that people approached a sports stadium. So simple things like the fact that normally when people are walking towards a sports stadium, and you can see the eyes, normally they have tunnel vision at, that they tend to just be following a certain path, tend to be very relaxed. They may be looking out for what gate of entry to the stadium, but they very rarely turn and look behind them. It tends to be, there are expectations that we have of behavior. And yes, we're deprived of some input, and I am concerned about the fact that masks can conceal expression. I think it's a major loss, but I don't think we should suddenly say, well, that makes it useless as a system.
Yes.
Because every element of the security system has its limitations. An archway metal detector does exactly what it says on the box, only detects metal. It doesn't detect carbon, it doesn't detect glass, it doesn't detect paper, it doesn't detect plastic, it doesn't detect explosives, it only
doesn't detect metal.
So nothing is the be all and end all. They're all different layers of a security system.
I think it will just be more challenging to the law enforcement to identify these people. That's, the biggest part of the challenge. But as to the proactive approach, you just don't look at the mouth or the face of the person. It's the overall thing. That's what Philip is saying.
But I think it also at the same time it may be a challenge, but it could also be an opportunity for us to be able to level up how we screen people, how we it's an evolving thing.
All right, we have a question from Sir Hermie. First is, what is the difference between behavioral analysis and behavior profiling or profiling?
You can have a semantic debate about it. There are different terminologies that are used. Actually, I always like the phrase profiling. I felt that's really what it was about. But somehow profiling is a swear word in certain countries like the
Yeah,
United
true.
States. They've been
Yeah.
vilified, and often the whole
Analysis.
data has been bogged down because of semantics. My company, we use tactical risk assessment of people, TRAP. People call it predictive profiling. People call it behavior detection. There are behavioral detection officers. Ultimately, I think we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about analysis of people and making an assessment based on our expectations of behavior in a given environment.
Another question from Sir Hermie. How can you avoid falling into the racial profiling? He used the term or the word here, trap, when pursuing behavioral analysis.
I think by a combination of things. One of them is making sure in the training that you illustrate a broad range of different characters. I'm using at the moment as a case study the Stephen Paddock, who was the guy who carried out the shooting at the Route 91 Harvest Festival in Las Vegas, and he carried out the shooting from the Mandalay Bay Hotel. You know, he doesn't fit any stereotype, but he's a really good case study to use. I used Martin Bryant, who carried out the massacre at Port Arthur in Tasmania. I think that's a really great case study to use. And so you make sure that you use a lot of case studies that do not depict your stereotypical threat. You talk about different criminal acts. You make sure it's not just about terrorism. You make sure that it's equally about, for example, addressing people with mental health problems, petty criminal behavior, trafficking, the other items that I mentioned earlier. And then you do have suspicious signs lists, and you make sure that when somebody does report something, and you ask them, what suspicious indicators did you identify? If all they can say is they were, and they just basically give an ethnic problem and nothing else, you can say, well, I'm sorry, that sounds to me like you are just making a decision based on ethnicity. Yeah. That said, I would never condemn somebody for mentioning ethnicity as long as there are other suspicious indicators as well.
I just have to say, comment from Sir Hermie again, behavior analysis should not be seen as a panacea, rather a part of a holistic approach to security, including threat and risk assessment, engagement training, etc. I think, that covers.
I totally agree. Absolutely.
We have another question from Mr. Ali Nasser. How can we deal with other agencies at airports? Because they always said that we are the law, this is how it's implement the procedures, but they cross the security procedures every day.
One of the accusations leveled at people that work at airports is that we work in silos and that we don't communicate with, like customs don't communicate with immigration, who don't communicate with the police. It's a very, very real problem. Turf wars are real problems in airport, and often the people doing airport security are very much the poor relations of every in the equation. That boils down to senior management actually bringing together and setting out their expectations as to how they expect the different forces to work. I've been doing some work with a couple of police forces here and in the United States, and they're recognizing that they're asking for input from all these different security agencies, but they often don't show the respect that is actually should be afforded to the people that are working on the front line. And I think that's down to the management of any institution, making sure that you engage people, you involve people, you have periodic meetings where you bring all the different departments together and for people to air their grievances. But I will freely admit that there are many places that just simply doesn't work. It's an idealistic view of the world, and unfortunately political ego, particularly within security agencies, sometimes is an impediment to real security.
From Sir Rodney Tidhar again, the question is, does video analysis biometrics can replace or back up security officers worldwide?
Technology.
I think artificial intelligence can play a huge role in the future applications of behavioral analysis. I have to say, at 12 o'clock here in London, and I think it's 8:30 this evening, I'm actually going to be having a demonstration of how AI can be used to identify a hostile vehicle behavior. So in effect, you can take any facility and identify the behavior of vehicles driving in and around that facility and how vehicles might behave if they were about to be used in a vehicle ramming incident or as a vehicle-borne IED. So I think, and that's not going to be achieved by human beings. That's going to be identified using technology. Biometrics, I think, have a place, but biometrics are normally being used to identify known individuals, more for identity rather than necessarily for behavioral analysis. But definitely things like gait analysis, the way that we walk, there is significant research being shown could be used in the future to identify somebody with criminal intent. I think technology could play a huge role in the future. There's worry that people are so keen to take the human being out of it and they
rely
want
too much.
the technology to do the job,
Yeah.
that we may jump onto that a little bit too quickly. I think they're all useful items that we can have in the toolkit.
From Dan Zika, how would you rate the use of behavior detection in the aviation industry?
I get really frustrated about the aviation industry because I was talking about this more than 30 years ago, and I've been trying to champion it certainly for the last quarter of a century. And I go to conference after conference after conference where we have the same conversations about how we must involve behavioral analysis more than we are. And yes, there are international standards that are out there. And finally, there is a recommendation that we do embrace behavioral analysis, but it's only a recommendation. Ultimately, we still put our faith first and foremost with technologies such as the X-ray machine that have really never ever proven themselves in an operational environment. I always ask people, how many examples can you give me of items of luggage that have been identified to be concealing an IED that is supposed to detonate on board a flight? And people across the industry say, I can't think of one. Or there was a test or a trial, or it was associated like with Anne-Marie Murphy, where first of all behavioral analysis was used, or I gave you the printer toner cartridge device, and you think, but actually people can't come up with the real examples. We can find lots of guns that were carried by Americans at checkpoints in the United States because they accidentally left the gun inside the bag.
We have our own case here in the Philippines. We call it laglag bala. It's like the bullets.
Not the gun.
Okay,
it's expensive.
there are lots of people that inadvertently left something in there that they shouldn't have left. But in terms of bombs designed to detonate on board aircraft, struggle to actually give you an example. I mean, there's one example I'm aware of. In all of the 60 years that we've been using X-ray machines, I can give you one example. Yeah, I can give you tens, possibly hundreds of examples of people saying something was wrong before a flight. 11 out of 19 hijackers on September the 11th, 2001 were reported before the flight because of their behavior. I get example after example after example of behavioral analysis working at airport. Look at immigration authorities, customs authorities. When you get off an airplane, customs authorities find people doing something wrong every single day after they've got off an aeroplane. I'm thinking, if you can do it after they've got off an aeroplane, don't tell me you can't do it before we get on an aeroplane. You can do it. You just have decided to count out to the civil libertarians out there that don't want us to do it. But we could do it. If there was a will to do it, we could do it. Because every other security agency does do it.
That will be our last question. Now we will proceed to our last segment, which we call the quick talk.
We will basically give you quick questions wherein you either choose from two options or you just have to drop us just a quick answer or a short answer. Do not worry because we do not require any explanation. This is just for fun and, just to end the episode on a lighter note. All right?
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Summer or winter?
It's winter here.
Desk work or field work?
Field work.
Dealing with employees or dealing with executives?
Employees.
Quickly, what is the most stressful but most rewarding part of your job?
The future is the most stressful.
Good answer.
Okay. Most memorable situation you have been where you used the things we talked about tonight?
Every day I open the door at home to somebody trying to sell something.
Very practical. Okay. Being a speaker or being a conference attendee?
I guess I got to say a speaker.
3 pieces of advice to help people develop these or the skill sets we have talked about.
Have faith in yourself. Empower those people that you have employed to make the right decisions, and always think outside the box.
I think that was it. Thank you very much, Philip, for such a wonderful discussion, for sharing to us your expertise. And we hope you had as much fun as we had tonight.
I did, and it's great being with you. I have to say, I do wish I was with you in person, but as I told you before the show, I've been to the Philippines a number of times, and I look forward to being able to come to Manila and visit your beautiful islands as well, and resorts in the future.
Philip, you have something to promote to our audience?
Well, please feel free to contact me if you're interested in behavioral analysis. There is my email address I can see has been put up on the screen, editor@avsec.com. If you're interested in behavioral analysis, and only too happy to engage in the conversation with you. And you'll see that seemingly on LinkedIn as well.
We hope that you've enjoyed and learned something new tonight through this episode. We also wish to have you again next time. We are casting live every Wednesday, 6:30 in the evening.
And to get the latest security information in the Philippines and for upcoming events, do not forget to follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn at Black Pearl Consultancy under Information Services, and on Twitter at BlackPearl_INC. Please also subscribe to our YouTube channel at Black Pearl Consultancy and give a like to our videos.
We'd also like to give special thanks to our production team, RR and Alan, and of course our managing director, Mr. Joseph Guetta, for making this program possible.
Again, this is Miles Melia.
And this is Erica Lindogan.
This has been Simply Security Season 2.
Helping you streamline security easily. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. Good morning,
Philip.
Philip.
Good morning, Philip.